Welcome to History Trivia, ang kasaysayan na dapat mong malaman.
History Trivia, ang kasaysayan na dapat mong malaman.
Before we get started, have you ever heard of this song?
I'm on my way, driving at 90 down those country lanes, singing to Tiny Dancer, and I miss the way.
Well, if you're a fan of Ed Sheeran, that song is entitled Castle on the Hill. That castle is called Framlingham Castle, a castle located literally on top of the hill. Located in Framlingham, sa county ng Suffolk sa England. So this is Ed Sheeran's story. Ed Sheeran was actually born in Halifax, it is in northern England, bago siya lumipat sa Framlingham at the age of 13. So yeah, nagkaroon siya ng maraming childhood memories sa Framlingham at isa ang kastilyong ito sa mga ron. And we will talk about that castle right now.
History Trivia, ang kasaysayan na dapat mong malaman. Kung mahilig ka sa kwento ng nakaraan, sining, giyera at agham, huwag kalimutang mag-subscribe at pindutin ang notification bell, para dalhin ka rin ang aking kwento sa nakaraan.
Now let us talk about Framlingham's geographical location. So Framlingham, situated in Suffolk in England, is both a market and a civil parish town. With its roots tracing back to Anglo-Saxon times, that town is documented in the 1086 Domesday Book. And among the neighboring villages are Earl Soham, Kettleburg, Parham, Saxted, and Sweffling. And there are also noteworthy towns and cities nearby as well, like yung Colchester, Bury St. Edmunds, Cambridge, and of course Ipswich. Framlingham Castle stands as a truly splendid castle from the late 12th century, and its impressive silhouette is mirrored in the tranquil waters of the nearby lake. Enveloped by lush parklands and expansive estates, this castle once occupied a central role within an extensive web of authority and impact. For an exceeding 4 centuries, it was possessed by dukes and earls of Norfolk, which are prominent figures of immense stature in East Anglia. These individuals were not only wealthy and ambitious, but also held considerable sway both within their local domain and on the international stage as well. So paano naman ginawa ang Framlingham Castle? Framlingham Castle came into existence through the efforts of the Bigods, isang napaka-impluwensyang pamilya Norman noong 12th century. The initial stone structures on the premises were most likely erected by Hugh Bigod, the first Earl of Norfolk. Yet, it was under the leadership of his successor, Roger Bigod II, that the expansive stone curtain walls that recently graced the site were constructed. In the year 1213, Roger Bigod II played host to King John within the castle walls. Nonetheless, relations soured by 1215. What happened was, Roger, along with a group of 25 barons, confronted King John's exorbitant military taxes, and effectively coerced him into acknowledging the Magna Carta Law. Kung hindi mo pa alam kung ano ang Magna Carta Law, ito ay nangangahulugang mahigpit na kasunduan sa Latin. Ito ay pinagtibay ni King John noong Hunyo 5 taong 1215, bilang isang paraan ng pagkakaroon ng kapayapaan sa isang grupo ng mga baron o mga maharlikang Ingles at mga leader ng simbahan. Ang mga baron ay nagprotesta laban sa mataas na buwis na hinihingi ni King John mula sa mga tao upang bayaran ang kanyang mga digmaan laban sa France. Ang Magna Carta Law ay naglimita sa mga kapangyarihan ng monarkiya. Sinasabi nito na ang hari o reyna ay sumasailalim sa batas at hindi maaaring gamitin ang kanilang posisyon at kapangyarihan upang maghari kung paano nila nais. Sinasabi rin ng Magna Carta Law that each and every individual has rights. Going back, Magna Carta Law led to heightened tensions, culminating in King John's siege to Framlingham in 1216. The castle yielded after a 2-day standoff. Ang pagkawala ng kastilyo ay lamang isang pansamantalang pagkabigo, and eventually, naibalik ito sa pag-aari ng pamilyang Bigod, dahil napatunayan na sila ang karapat-dapat na may-ari. During the 14th century, the ownership of Framlingham Castle transferred to the Brotherton clan, and for around 17 years, it was under the control of Margaret, nakilala sa pagiging elegante ng kanyang pamumuhay sa kastilyo. Ay isang babaeng may kapangyarihan sa kanyang panahon at ang unang ginawang duchess sa kanyang sariling karapatan. Margaret, King Edward's granddaughter, stood as a formidable woman. While her story isn't as widely known as those of her fellow women during that era, she filled a significant role in the medieval England. Isinilang noong 1320 kay Thomas Brotherton ang unang Earl of Norfolk at Alice Hales, and then ikinasal si Margaret pagkatapos ng 15 taon. Isang karaniwang pangyayari para sa mga babae noong panahong iyon. Ang kanyang asawa ay si John na kilala ding si Lord Seagrave, isang sundalo at baron at sila ay nagkaroon ng 4 na anak. Ang pangalawang anak ni Margaret ay pinanganak nung siya ay 18 taong gulang pa lamang. At noong 1338, kasama ang kanyang kapatid na si Alice, si Margaret ay nagtagumpay sa pag-aari ng mga ari-arian ng pamilyang Brotherton. Ang kanilang kapatid na lalaki ay namatay a year prior. And then a daring journey happened. By about 1350, the redoubtable Margaret was unhappy and determined enough to seek a divorce from Lord Seagrave, ignoring a royal ban on her travel. She out for Rome in person to plead with the Pope. Story familiar, di ba? Pero sa babae naman. Unfortunately, for Margaret, she wasn't able to secure a divorce and was arrested on Edward VIII's orders for violating her travel ban. Lord Seagrave died in April 1353, and soon afterwards, Margaret married Lord Walter Mauny. She was soon in trouble with the law again, and had her land seized for marrying him without securing a license from the king. Following her trial, 2 of the king's sergeants were ordered to lead as quietly and honorably as they traveled to Framlingham Castle in Lincolnshire, where she was detained. Talagang lawbreaker talaga itong si Margaret, no? By May 1354, however, the Brotherton estates had been restored to Margaret, which includes Framlingham Castle. And in 1355, she was pardoned for both her marriage to Lord Mauny and her illegal travel. Sana ako pinapatawad. Ikaw kaya? Napatawad mo na siya? And this is Margaret's life at Framlingham Castle. Following Lord Mauny's death in 1372, Margaret, an astute female entrepreneur, dedicated the final 27 years of her life to the management of her extensive properties. And by this point, she already had inherited her Brotherton estates, Seagrave lands, and a portion of the spoils from the Lord Mauny's wartime endeavors. Sana all mayaman. Ang karamihan ng kanyang oras ay nakafocus sa paligid ng Framlingham Castle sa Suffolk. Walang mga umaasa sa kanya, kaya't malaya niyang nagagamit ng kanyang mga yaman ayon sa kanyang nais. Madalas itong ginugo sa marangyang pangmumuhay at maraming pagtitipon ng mga tao. A record from 1385 to 1386 kept by Giles Wenlock, the household overseer, sheds light on Margaret's extravagant way of life. In that single year, a staggering 70,321 loaves of bread were consumed, along with 40 barrels of red herring, 72 and a half cattle carcasses, 9 wild boars, 151 pig and 697 sheep carcasses, 24 pounds of saffron, and gallons of red white wine. Wow. Margaret, already a prominent widow, developed close relationship with nobles like John of Gaunt, who she exchanged gifts with, and Henry Bolingbroke, who later became Henry IV, and who entrusted his son's education to her, and Richard FitzAlan, the Earl of Arundel, who mentioned her in his will despite no family ties. Around 1370s, Margaret adopted the title Countess Marshal, though her father's role as Marshal of England was given to the Earl of Salisbury. Undeterred, she became known as Margaret Marshal, seeking to fulfill the role's duties but with a largely symbolic impact. At noong ika-29 ng Setyembre 1397, itinaas ang kalagayan ni Margaret from Countess to Duchess ng Norfolk. 2 taon matapos iyon, halos 80 taon gulang na siya. Siya ay pumanaw na at nilibing sa Grey Friars sa London. Framlingham Castle came into the possession of Mary Tudor in 1552, after the disgrace of Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk. The castle played a significant role during a succession crisis, when Mary's appointment by their father, Henry VIII, to be next in line of succession, faced opposition from Lady Jane Grey. Naghahanap ng takas si Mary sa Framlingham Castle, kung saan nagtipon siya ng kanyang mga tropa at natanggap ang balita ng pagbibitiw ni Northumberland na humantong sa kanyang pagpapahayag bilang unang reyna ng England. At bilang reyna, ibinalik ni Mary ang mga lupa at mga lugar na dapat na pagmamayari ng mga duke sa mga Howard. And as the first queen of England, Mary had been summoned to London to visit her dying brother during his final days. Undoubtedly so that she could be seized by John Dudley, an astute general and politician. Dudley had led the young king's government and had recently arranged for his son to marry Lady Jane. To what extent Dudley had influenced Edward in naming Lady Jane as his successor is unclear. However, he fervently supported her after the king's death. Mary, instead, fled to East Anglia, where she owned extensive estates, including the well-fortified Framlingham Castle. And through the disgrace of Thomas Howard, the third Duke of Norfolk, it had come into the hands of Mary the previous year. The Howards had spent lavishly on refurbishing the castle. Protected by a mere and surrounded by parkland and estates, Framlingham was an ideal location for Mary to make her stand against Dudley and his supporters. It was close enough to London to threaten her opponents there, and well defended in the event Dudley's forces made their move. On the 12th of July, year 1553, Mary assembled her supporters at Framlingham, and over the next few days, things began to swing in her favor. She was soon joined by some powerful supporters, including Edward Mohun, the tax collector of Edward VI. With the royal finances in her control and her support base growing by the day, Mary was well placed to march on her opponents. She wrote to the Privy Council and eventually won their favor. At noong ika-19 ng July, the council unanimously agreed to proclaim Mary as queen, who was behind the walls of Framlingham when she found out. She still had to be actually crowned, and she was in October. But history was made. England finally had a female ruler with the name of Mary I. If you want to know more about Queen Mary I's life, you may find the link of this video in the description below. In 1635, the castle changed ownership when it was purchased by a wealthy lawyer and philanthropist named Sir Robert Hitcham. Following his passing a year later, he specified in his will that the castle should be torn down, and in its place, a workhouse should be constructed. Ano daw? Inutos niya itong ipasira? After years of legal wrangling, the first poor families began their work in the Red House in the mid-17th century, and a new building to house them was added in 1729, just over 100 years later. The last workhouse inmates left, and the building was used as a parish hall. In 1913, Robert Hitcham's former college in Cambridge, Pembroke College, assumed responsibility for the castle's preservation, placing it under state guardianship since 1984. English Heritage has been overseeing its management. Castle on the Hill or Framlingham Castle is also one of the places that I've been in, which was indeed an amazing experience. One famous castle, multiple stories, and the rest are history. If you want to know more about kasaysayan na dapat mong malaman, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell. And once again, my name is Jay saying, Cheers mate.